Construction megaprojects demand eye-watering amounts of time, people, materials, ambition, and of course, money. Lots and lots of money. And when things go wrong at this scale, the impact can ripple through entire economies. We're not just talking about small rounding errors or a bit of accidental over-tipping here. So, in the spirit of learning from the most expensive mistakes ever made, we've rounded up some of the world's most notorious bank-breaking megaprojects. Settle in, make sure you're sitting down, and prepare to have your mortgage start to look like peanuts. This is one of Europe's biggest construction sites, perhaps even the biggest. Hinkley Point C is the first nuclear power plant the UK has built in decades, and it's set to usher in a whole new generation of energy infrastructure for the country. But it's been beset by huge delays, environmental disputes, and cost rises, to the point where it's now expected to become the most expensive project of its kind ever constructed. And with other schemes due to follow its blueprints, the pressure is now firmly on to finish the job. This is the story of Britain's divisive nuclear megaproject, a spectacular feat of engineering at risk of being overshadowed by controversy. In the mid-1950s, after the horrors of Hiroshima, three nations began a race to develop nuclear power for uses other than bombs. The Soviet Union was the first to generate electricity with atomic energy in 1954. 3 years later, the US unveiled a full-scale nuclear power plant dedicated to peaceful purposes before anyone else. But in between, the UK made its own piece of history.
There's nothing like it anywhere in the world. Neither Russia nor the United States is yet creating electric power on this scale from the atom.
At the Calder Hall power station in northern England, atomic energy was used commercially for the first time, although its main purpose was to make plutonium for nuclear weapons. Still, that meant the UK was once a pioneer in the field of nuclear, which continues to be a major source of energy well into the 21st century. So surely then, its mission to construct a brand new nuclear power plant has gone swimmingly. Well, not exactly. It's taken much longer to build and become way more expensive than was originally predicted. The project has also gotten extremely complicated and pretty chaotic. However, delivering 2 new nuclear reactors after not building any for a very, very long time is challenging to say the least. You see, right now there are 9 nuclear reactors operating across the UK over 5 different sites. Together, they generate around 13% of the country's electricity, but many of them are nearing the end of their lifespans based on old technologies and are either due to be decommissioned or have already started the process. 6 have been shut down in the last few years, and there hasn't been a new power plant built here since the 1980s. And yet, that doesn't mean the UK's given up on nuclear completely. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It now plans to build as many as 8 new reactors between today and 2050. Now, 2050 might sound like a very long way off, but Hinkley Point C is providing a quarter of those new reactors on its own. As you can see, this project is simply enormous. The spot where it's being built, on the south bank of the Bristol Channel in Somerset, England, is widely considered to be Europe's largest construction site. Spanning 430 acres, it dwarfs the plants beside it, Hinkley Point A and B, both of which were built in the 1950s and 60s and are now closed. When complete, Plant C will produce 7% of the UK's electricity, enough to power around 6 million homes for 60 years. But how is it all coming together, and what even are the main components of a modern nuclear power plant? Well, first of all, it's important to kind of understand the basics of where all that power is coming from. Yes, we're talking about the reactors. To put it simply, it's part of the system where uranium atoms are split apart through a process called fission. That creates heat, which converts water into steam. Next, the steam is used to turn a turbine, generating electricity. Now, as if building the first British nuclear power plant in over 30 years isn't a big enough challenge, it's also the first time that EPR reactors have been used in the UK. Now, EPR stands for European Pressurised Water Reactor, They've already been deployed in other areas of the continent, at Flamanville in France and Olkiluoto in Finland. Both of those are new and were built by EDF, the energy company now fully owned by the French government, which just so happens to be in charge of Hinkley Point C. These reactors use 17% less uranium than older technologies and have 4 safety systems to protect against hazards like floods and earthquakes. Not that we get many of those in the UK, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Now, let's get back to that enormous power plant and try and decipher where you'll actually find the reactors at Hinkley Point C. Well, they're located in the reactor buildings, and you can't really miss them thanks to their enormous size. Like almost every structure on this site, a great deal of machine power was necessary for their construction. In fact, because so much of the build requires massive segments to be moved around simultaneously, there are cranes everywhere, more than 50 of them at a time, including one that stands out from the rest. Meet Big Carl, the world's largest land-based crane. Carl's been used for a number of heavy lifting tasks, including putting the dome onto the first reactor building and placing the giant liner rings, which weigh hundreds of tons each. There are 3 of them on each unit, and together they form part of the inner containment wall. Once in position, they're encased in 2 layers of concrete. Vast amounts of the material was needed overall, 25% more than on the power plant's Hinkley Point C was modelled on. 9,000 cubic metres of the stuff was poured in one go for the base of the first reactor, beating a record held by London's Shard. Now, that's because British regulations required a number of changes compared to those on the sites in France and Finland. And when I say a number of changes, I don't just mean a small number. In fact, 7,000 alterations were carried out to make this place compliant. As well as all that extra concrete, 35% more steel was put in. But as you might have guessed, adhering to these rules became more time-consuming than originally thought and contributed to some major delays. As for the reactor itself, the main component, the pressure vessel, was delivered in 2023 and installed in late 2024. The giant steel container, which will hold the nuclear fuel, was first lifted onto rails and inserted through an equipment hatch. Then, once inside the reactor building, it was gently rotated and lowered into place. Surrounding each of these vessels will be 4 steam generators, 25 metres long and weighing over 500 tonnes. After 6 years of design, manufacturing and testing, the first one was delivered to site in May 2024, following a journey from northern France across sea and road. Just next door to the reactor buildings are the absolutely enormous turbine halls. 50 metres tall, these are going to house the largest turbines of their kind anywhere in the world. Now, it doesn't look much like a finished power plant yet, but with so much activity on site, you'd be forgiven for assuming that this thing must be getting pretty close to the end. But you'd be wrong. It probably won't be operational until at least 2029, and that's with just one of the reactors running. Full power is now expected in 2031. But that wasn't the original plan. When contracts were first signed back in 2016, the original plan was to complete the whole project in 2025. And as is often the case in these situations, the price tag has gone up substantially.
It will cost as much as £10 billion extra to build the plant, over €11 billion.
What was due to cost £18 billion when it was first greenlit could end up as high as $46 billion after inflation. That works out at more than $57 billion, considerably higher than what was spent on the new reactors at Plant Vogel in the US, which had their own share of problems. The costs have gotten so high at Hinkley Point that it's now on track to be the most expensive nuclear power plant ever constructed, and by some distance. According to EDF, there are a number of reasons for this. It's been hit by labour and material shortages, COVID caused over a year of delays, and then there were those regulatory changes we talked about earlier. Training up the workforce and forming supply chains in a country that hasn't built one of these for a generation has taken a lot longer than planned. Another concern has been the environmental impact, and it's not all to do with nuclear waste. Of course, that has been an issue for many people, and the plan is to ultimately store the waste hundreds of metres underground in a new type of specialised facility. Instead, a lot of the backlash is actually to do with fish. You see, nuclear power plants require huge amounts of water to keep their reactors cool, and they have to get it from somewhere. To ensure there's enough water for Hinkley Point C, 8 kilometres of tunnels have been built connecting the site to the Bristol Channel. These are going to allow up to 120,000 litres of water to be transferred every second. The problem is, the channel is full of fish, so there's a danger that many are going to get pulled into the system by accident. Because of this, EDF is planning to introduce a fish recovery and return system. Then there was a requirement from the Marine Management Organisation to install an acoustic deterrent. This would essentially blast sound underwater to scare fish away from the intakes. EDF isn't too keen on this idea, calling it dangerous to install and unproven, which is why they've put forward an alternative, creating new salt marshes in the surrounding area. EDF says these are going to provide breeding grounds and shelter for all kinds of wildlife. This, they claim, will make up for the fact that they might be sucking tons of fish out of the water every month. But that decision's come under fire too. Because hundreds of acres of land would have to be flooded to form these habitats, some local farmers have objected to the idea alongside the local council. But with a project like Hinkley Point C, it's all about perspective. Yes, what's happened so far hasn't been a roaring success, but building something this complex after so long was never going to be easy. Looking forward, there is some cause for optimism. EDF believes the worst is behind them and that they've learned the lessons from the setbacks they faced on the first reactor. Teams are using the lessons learned on Unit 1 to make the construction of Unit 2 20 to 30% more efficient. For example, they're now able to weld together the massive steel pools 4 times quicker than before. Their job is to house the reactor and shield against radiation. Another thing that makes this so important to get right is what's in the pipeline after this scheme is finally wrapped up. EDF is currently getting ready for its next UK plant, Sizewell C in Suffolk. That'll be a virtual replica of Hinkley Point C, and you can be pretty sure the company is going to want to avoid making similar mistakes again. With the UK planning to quadruple its nuclear capacity by the middle of this century, the country can't really afford a repeat of this project's complications. And yet, when you really look at what's being built here, it truly is an astonishing feat of construction. As one of the birthplaces of atomic energy, the UK's lack of nuclear progress is somewhat surprising. But with Hinkley Point C, it's looking to regain some ground on an epic scale after what's been a difficult journey. It's the biggest energy decision this country has made in decades, but whether it'll be looked back on as a good or bad choice in years to come remains to be seen.
New York City is home to some of the world's most iconic buildings. But its most impressive structure might actually be right here.
Underground. With the swipe of a Metro card, you can ride from the Bronx to Midtown to Brooklyn to Queens, all on the same network. But it's not always seamless.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are delayed because of train traffic ahead of us.
Now, New York is undergoing its biggest subway expansion in 50 years, with the 2nd Avenue subway. This stretch between 63rd Street and 96th was completed in 2017, and it cost $1.7 billion per kilometre. Yes, that's billion with a B. And that's just phase 1 of the project. There are plans to extend the line even further uptown from 96th Street to 125th. Now, the newly passed US infrastructure bill could help fund the $6 billion price tag on phase 2. Of course, there's the challenge of building beneath the city that never sleeps, dodging layers of existing underground infrastructure, and manoeuvring tunnel boring machines across Manhattan. It took nearly 100 years to complete the first few kilometres of the 2nd Avenue subway. So can New York do it all again? New York's subway system helped make the city a world leader in urban transportation.
Almost any section of the city is within easy walking distance of a subway station.
Today, there are more than 470 stations across 4 boroughs. That's more than any other underground system in the world. In recent decades, though, the subway's lost its edge over other cities with more reliable networks. Tokyo's built an uber-efficient subway system that takes reliability to a whole new level. Many cities like London, Hong Kong and Sydney have smart ticketing systems. Seoul and Shanghai have step-free access at 100% of their stations. New York, not so much. Accessibility is notoriously bad across the network. The city just recently got contact payment technology in its stations. The trains can get crowded, tunnels are deteriorating, delays are inevitable, and projects to fix it have a tendency to go way over budget. When we say this moment has been a long time in the making, we mean a really, really long time. The idea for a Second Avenue subway was first tabled in 1920. The city put a budget together for it in 1929, and then the Great Depression hit. Just when it looked like the economy had recovered and construction was about to begin, World War II kicked off and the project was delayed again.
On 2nd Avenue, for example, work is getting underway on a new subway line that will run from the Bronx all the way down to the tip of Manhattan.
That video is from 1973. For nearly a century, the 2nd Avenue subway was proposed, postponed, started, stopped, and pushed further down the priority list. Meanwhile, subway access on the east side of Manhattan began to lag behind the rest of the city. Finally, in 2006, federal funding was approved and construction on the 2nd Avenue subway began again in 2007. In all, the new line is envisioned to stretch across the entire east side, from 125th Street in East Harlem to Hanover Square in downtown. And it'll be constructed in 4 separate phases. So far, they've gotten through phase 1. It extends the existing Q train from 63rd Street to 96th Street. The station at Lexington and 63rd Street was upgraded and modernised, and new stations were built around 72nd, 86th and 96th Streets. Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue subway would extend the Q train even further up down to 125th Street, building 3 new stations at 106th, 116th and 125th Streets. The aim is to reduce overcrowding and delays and improve accessibility at the stations. Almost 200,000 people are estimated to use the new line that was built for Phase 1.
But getting approval for Phase 2 might be tricky, especially given how much time and money it's taken to complete Phase 1. In fact, it took so much time and money that at one stage the 2nd Avenue subway was the world's most expensive subway track. That's until it was overtaken by New York's other scheme, the East Side Access Project, just down the road.
Now, there's a few reasons why the new stations and roughly 3 kilometres of track had a $4.5 billion price tag. Firstly, building in New York is expensive. Construction costs are generally higher here compared to other cities and countries. New York is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, which means any construction is probably going to affect a lot of people's daily lives. And below ground, there's a maze of building foundations, sewer pipes, power lines, and existing subway lines to avoid. Back in the old days of building the subway, construction crews would shut down the entire street for excavation. But that kind of approach won't really fly today. It's loud and disruptive for the many people who now live and work in the area. Instead, the crew used tunnel boring machines they could lower into the ground and drill through the hard rock for almost 40 blocks, without people above ground even noticing. But the most expensive element wasn't actually the twin-track tunnelling. Roughly half of the budget went towards building the new stations. They're some of the largest underground excavations in America. Before blasting, the crew reinforced some of the nearby buildings to protect them from the force. Construction teams then drilled, blasted, and reinforced the inside of the caverns, all while people lived and worked in the buildings just above ground. Once those caverns were cleared and the tracks laid, designers worked to specially construct the new stations to dull the sound of the rattling subway cars that New Yorkers know all too well. Instead of the echo-prone tile and stone that's used in other stations across the city, engineering firm Arup lined the new station's ceilings with metal panels backed with sound-absorbing fiberglass. When the 2nd Avenue subway was first put forward back in the 1920s, Designers, planners and politicians were probably all working off some paper drawings that needed to be passed around for approval. Now, after 100 years of updated designs, budgets and teams, a paper filing system isn't going to cut it. That's where digital platforms like Autodesk Build become essential. It's a construction management platform that's easy to use for teams, whether they're in the office on their desktop or deep below ground with a tablet. Teams can control who has access to what information and make sure everyone's working from the most up-to-date data. It's a single source of truth that's all updated in the cloud. As America sets out to rebuild its aging infrastructure, tools like this will be key. Making sure projects run on time and on budget is crucial for the 2nd Avenue subway, especially as it has so many phases left to complete. We reached out to a range of organisations asking for an interview for this video, but no one wanted to talk about Phase 2. Despite the challenges, the full 2nd Avenue subway could have a huge impact on New York. Extending the Q train to 125th Street would better connect East Harlem with the rest of the city. The long-term benefits this project could bring to commuters and the city have the potential to long outlive the political and construction complexities of today.
The subway system's been a quintessential part of New York City for generations, but now it's up to New York to make sure that it remains fit for generations to come.
This brand new international airport has been sitting completely empty for almost a decade. A ghost train runs once a day from the nearby city to keep the air moving. Its hotel has a skeleton staff dusting empty rooms and turning on taps to keep the water from going stagnant. Its luggage carousels rotate daily, but with no suitcases in sight just to stop them from seizing up. And the boards that should be displaying departing and arriving flights have had to be replaced. They're already worn out despite not ever showing a single flight trip. It's 2019 and this is Europe's most disastrous and controversial airport. Welcome to Brandenburg, Berlin, a place that took 3 decades to build.
Hello from one of Europe's most controversial airports. This place has been in development since the 1990s. It took 14 years to build and its budget soared to over 7 billion euros. Welcome to Brandenburg Airport.
This place has now been open for 5 years and is a thriving bit of aviation infrastructure. You could walk off a plane through any terminal and you'd have no idea of the turmoil of its construction, or the ghost airport that it was just a few years ago. But the story of how it got to this stage is far from simple. First conceived when the wall came down in 1989, the airport was supposed to be a symbol of a newly unified Berlin. Instead, it's become a symbol of modern Germany's over-bureaucratization and mismanagement. More than 500,000 faults were found back when it was supposed to be opened in 2012, including a fire safety system that didn't work and more than 170,000 kilometers of cable that had to be reinstalled. But what's often forgotten is that this disaster actually started out with an incredibly admirable goal. First off, you have to understand the power of the aeroplane as both a remarkable piece of engineering and a symbol. For East Berliners, the idea of flying west or around the globe was nothing more than a fantasy, until
thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, the country had new problems to deal with, namely a population that had just doubled.
What was once 2 cities became 1. That meant merging 2 disparate economies, 2 vastly different infrastructure systems, 2 governments, and 2 cultures. Many East Berliners lost their jobs, while many West Berliners viewed their counterparts as economic burdens. There was massive social division.
The new unified Berlin wanted to become a hub for international travel. But its 3 airports were outdated and not able to handle the number of people that then lived in the city.
There were 2 for the former West Berlin over here at Tegel and Tempelhof, and 1 for the east at Schönfeld. Running all of these smaller, outdated airports was pretty inefficient, so it was decided that a new world-class international hub would be constructed, comparable to those in Frankfurt and Munich. It would announce Berlin as a new power in Europe and as Germany's renewed capital. But perhaps most importantly, it would symbolise the reunification of the country. Berlin needed to be bound together, and this airport would do it. This was the first sign that things would not go entirely smoothly for Brandenburg Airport. It took them 6 years to decide on a site, and after all that time, they ended up choosing here, right next to the existing Schönefeld Airport.
It wasn't until 2004 that this new airport was finally approved. The goal was to create a state-of-the-art new hub that could handle up to 27 million passengers a year, with room for expansion.
But further delays meant that construction didn't start until 2006, just in time for the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. The global economic downturn made it very difficult to find a contractor to build and fund the airport, so they used public money. According to Martin Delius, a former Berlin city politician, those in charge decided to break the airport into lots of smaller contracts, with different companies and people in charge of those different sections. They did that in an attempt to get lower prices, but what they ended up creating was a vastly complicated system with many heads that was incredibly difficult to oversee. Meinhard von Gerkan was brought on board to be the chief architect. He had designed Berlin landmarks like the Central Railway Station, and already had one airport under his belt over at Tegel. He would essentially be replacing himself. Conflicts between von Gerkan and the politicians in charge came about almost immediately, the details of which were handily published in von Gerkan's tell-all book, in which he blamed everyone else for the airport's delays. Von Gerkan hated shops. He hated how airports were becoming giant malls. He hated, and this is a quote, passengers in his airport dragging around unwanted bottles of whiskey like a beggar. So he designed his airports to have as few shops as possible. But when the airport company eventually realised this, they insisted on adding new floors just for shopping. After all, they expected to make up to 50% of their revenue from retail. It's safe to say that von Gerkan wasn't pleased. Berlin's then mayor, Klaus Wowereit, insisted that departure gates accommodate giant Airbus A380 aircraft that were no longer in production by the time the airport opened. On the flip side, they didn't have any gates designed for the low-cost flight revolution that was suddenly taking over Europe. This again necessitated a last-minute redesign, as they only had the much bigger expensive jet bridges. All of these constant design changes led to unrealistic deadlines. There was too much to do, and what needed to be done kept getting changed at the last minute. All the while, the 2012 grand opening date loomed over them. They'd already pushed it back by a year, invitations had been sent out, and the press was waiting. They really couldn't delay again. So these issues were ignored, until a few weeks before the grand opening, an inspector found the airport's entire fire safety system to be completely faulty. There was officially no way this airport could function, and the opening was cancelled, embarrassing both Berlin and Germany as a whole. Further investigations revealed major structural and technical problems, including more than 120,000 defects. One of which being more than 170,000 kilometers of incorrectly installed cable. All at once, the astonishing scale of the new airport's problems became horribly public. Von Gerkan was fired, and following his departure, Hartmut Mehrdorn was brought in to manage the construction of the airport. As the former CEO of Germany's biggest railway company, Mehrdorn promised to finally deliver this project. He carried out his own investigation into the airport, and if you thought 120,000 defects was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. He found an incredible 550,000 faults. The budget ballooned from €2 billion to over €7 billion. And it was at this point that many called for the whole thing to be scrapped, for the airport project to be started again from scratch. But the plane had well and truly left the gate. Far too much money had been spent already for the project to simply be abandoned. The years rolled by and more target dates were missed. The airport didn't open in 2013, 2014 or 2017. Which brings us back to 2019, where the airport sat unused and empty, waiting for planes that, it seemed, would never land. So 2020 wasn't a great year for the aviation industry. The pandemic was a once-in-a-generation event. International travel was banned pretty much overnight. It was the absolute worst possible time to open an airport. After nearly a decade of delays, Berlin-Brandenburg Airport finally opened on Halloween, October 31st, 2020. Unfortunately, the airport's capacity was already insufficient for the number of passengers that were expected to use it. In an ordinary year, that would be a disaster, but thanks to the pandemic and the far fewer passengers Berlin was receiving, for once Brandenburg Airport had ample time to adjust and avoid any major operational chaos. Technical glitches were fixed quietly and mass public scrutiny was avoided. This was kind of a soft opening. By the time travel rebounded in 2022 and 2023, Brandenburg had worked through most of its opening phase issues. The Berlin Wall stood for 3 decades. That's also how long it took for this airport to finally open. While Brandenburg continues to have its challenges, post-COVID its operation has been relatively smooth. The story of its construction is yet another reminder that major infrastructure projects are often built for future generations, not for the ones building them. Today, Berlin-Brandenburg is thriving. It recently won the Airport Innovation Award in 2023, beating out rivals Vienna, Frankfurt and Amsterdam, and an audit by Skytrax awarded it 4 stars just this year for its efficiency and service quality. On top of that, it's now one of the first airports in the world to use AI in its operations for analysis of aircraft handling in real time. The airport has finally arrived, and it's fulfilling its promise of a united Berlin on the cutting edge. While its symbolic power may be tarnished, Brandenburg Airport was eventually built. It'll now be enjoyed by generations who never saw the wall intact, living in the fully unified city their parents had always dreamed of. It may have taken a long time to get there, but Berlin's newest airport has officially taken flight. Construction projects don't come much bigger than this. HS2 is a new high-speed railway being built right up the heart of Britain, with the promise of economic growth, low-carbon travel, more capacity, and some of the fastest trains on Earth.
High Speed 2 is one of the world's biggest infrastructure projects. It'll start right here in the heart of London and run across through and under England's countryside to the Midlands and one day beyond. But building it is far from easy.
The project has gone several times over budget and faced delays and staunch opposition. It's now known more for its setbacks and the decisions of those in power than its benefits or the incredible engineering that's going on. An idea to bring a country closer together has become divisive.
HS2 will generate jobs, skills and economic growth.
It is just a waste of money, a terrible waste of taxpayers' money.
And that's not just a UK issue, we're seeing this everywhere. When public money is involved, the stakes get much higher, the scrutiny gets more intense. And when things go wrong, it can become difficult or even impossible to stop. So how much say do we really have over the massive projects like High Speed 2 built with our money? Can our governments ever stop once they've started? And does there come a point with these projects where they're just no longer worth it?
We can now travel over land at the rate of 30 miles an hour. Think of it, ladies and gentlemen. 30 miles an hour. Euston.
Departure point for 175 trains every day.
We need to build new railway lines in our country. We haven't built a line north of London for 120 years.
It will redefine the way we travel around our country, I'm absolutely convinced.
Finally giving the home of the railways the fast connections they need, and none of it makes any sense without HS2.
The way that UK government makes decisions with ebb and flow depending on the political weather, that's not how you deliver major infrastructure.
We're in a climate emergency. We need to be doing sustainable creation, not destroying the country. This project is absolute madness.
In the whole size of HS2, the only thing to do is keep digging.
HS2 will deliver lots of benefits, there's no question about that. The question is whether it's worth the costs.
Like many countries, the UK is divided. There are big economic and social differences between the capital and the rest of the country, and there's little sign of anything changing. Back in 2009, the government proposed a new high-speed railway to better connect London and the north of England, spreading wealth up the country. 3 years later, that project was approved and billions of taxpayer cash was set aside for it. It's called High Speed 2, which is often shortened to HS2, and it's being built in 3 stages. Phase 1 runs from London to Birmingham, Phase 2A will carry the route to a town called Crewe, and 2B takes it to Manchester and originally Leeds. High-speed trains would then continue on to other parts of the country at normal speeds, using the existing network, so those living in the wider north and Scotland can benefit too. The trains will have a top speed of 225 miles an hour, the fastest in Europe. Now, to do that, they need a track that's as straight and flat as possible, but drawing a straight flat line up England isn't easy. Some 90% of the Phase 1 route will be up on bridges and viaducts, or dug below ground in tunnels and cuttings, making it an immense feat of engineering. A journey north from London will begin here, in a new 3-storey terminal at Euston. It'll have the UK's longest concourse, a prefabricated geometric roof, and 10 platforms built some 8 metres below ground.
This site down here at Euston is where that massive new terminal is going to start to rise in the years to come. Now, it might not look like much right now, but just getting to this stage has been tough going, and the team has faced all the kind of challenges you might expect them to face when clearing a site like this in the heart of a major city. Existing buildings, neighbouring properties, traffic, services, and of course the current live railway running into Euston alongside them.
After Euston, trains will arrive at Old Oak Common, where there'll be additional links to Heathrow Airport, Wales and the South West. The first landmark outside London is the Colne Valley Viaduct. It'll run for 3.4 kilometres across several waterways and become the country's longest railway crossing. Next up is the 16-kilometre Chiltern Tunnel, the longest and deepest on the entire route, sitting up to 90 metres underground. Then it's another tunnel, but this one is less about length and depth and more about what's above it. The UK has over 300,000 hectares of ancient woodland. That's trees that have been around since 1600. Despite weathering the ages, some of those trees now find themselves in the path of HS2. Instead of cutting them all down, planners have tried to limit their destruction, and one way is to go underneath them, like up here at Long Itchington Wood.
This is one of HS2's new tunnels, and just behind me back there is where construction teams are working away to dig this route deep beneath England's countryside. Now, when you're down here, you can't help but be blown away by the scale of the engineering that's going into this project. In years to come, people on trains are going to pass through here in a matter of seconds. They'll be drinking a coffee, doing some emails, and they probably won't even notice.
But to make that leisurely experience possible, construction teams are putting in the grind, using 2,000-ton tunnel boring machines like this to cut a path. The machines feature a cutting head at the front and a system that quickly takes soil back up to the surface in these pipes along the sides of the tunnel.
This is the very front of one of HS2's tunnel boring machines. Just ahead of me up there is a massive cutting head that's steadily eating its way through the soil by about 20 to 24 metres a day. Slowly but surely, this machine is building part of HS2.
The Long Itchington Tunnel will run for 1.6 kilometres and be the first to complete across the whole route when it finishes in 2023.
It's just one example of some of the massive feats of engineering that are taking place between London and the Midlands to enable this high-speed line to run. In time, those incredibly fast trains are going to run across the ground I'm currently standing on, through this cutting, and on towards Birmingham.
The last stop before Birmingham is the Solihull Interchange, currently billed as the world's most eco-friendly railway station, with connections to the airport and the exhibition centre. Phase 1 then all culminates at Birmingham Curzon Street. It's the first intercity rail terminus built in the UK since the 1800s, and it'll feature an arched roof inspired by the railway pioneers of that era.
It's all a lot of work and money to connect London and the Midlands, but there's a payoff: economic growth. The idea is that the billions being poured into this project will be paid back, and that millions of people will have their quality of life improved. High-speed rail effectively brings major cities and population centres closer together. Businesses can access larger customer bases, supply chains and labour pools. Integration and trade are improved, productivity goes up, and commuting longer distances becomes possible. You no longer have to buy a house in an expensive region in order to work there, and that takes pressure off the housing crisis. HS2 will slash journey times. Getting from London to Birmingham will take just 45 minutes, 37 minutes quicker than today. But better connectivity between regions is about more than just speed. There's another key word in all this: capacity. If you take a look at the UK's rail map, you might question whether this project makes any sense. London already has a direct connection to Birmingham and Manchester via the West Coast Main Line, so why build another? Well, because it's one of the busiest railways in Europe. It's used by intercity, local and freight trains all at the same time, and things can get crowded. HS2 will be just for high-speed passenger trains. It'll mean getting up and down the country quicker and free up much needed space on the existing lines. The hope is that this all makes taking the train an obvious choice, as compared to driving or catching a domestic flight. It's designed to be the world's most sustainable high-speed railway, offering carbon-free travel from the day the trains start running. It all seems like a good idea, but there are some who question whether the UK actually needs this high-speed line at all. Unlike some other countries renowned for their high-speed rail networks, the UK's major cities are all much closer together. That's a factor that's perpetuated the lack of an extensive high-speed network in the UK to date, and one reason why it hasn't cultivated much homegrown talent or expertise good at building it. The guy tasked with assembling and leading the team that's having a go for the first time in decades is Mark Thurston.
HS2 is a once-in-a-generation project. We will connect all the major cities on that corridor in our country at high speed. Clearly make a massive difference to the way we decarbonise our transport system. I mean, it is unprecedented. Over 300 sites alone just between here and the West Midlands. But also, again, if you look around us here in Euston, we're right on top of the local community. So how do we build this railway sensitively in a way that respects people who've got to kill their lives, for some years yet, until this railway is fully commissioned?
Now, you might be wondering who gets the say over whether or not big, expensive projects that impact so many people's lives like this get to happen. Well, it's complicated, but stick with us because grasping this will help you better understand how your tax money is being spent. The UK is a constitutional monarchy. The sovereign is in charge but delegates all their power to a democratically elected government and lower house of parliament called the House of Commons. Like many countries, we elect people from each region to sit on that parliament and represent us. The political party that wins the most seats forms the government. They get to control all the government departments and decide which laws are introduced and debated in the House of Commons. They pretty much set the agenda. Now, we decide which candidate or party we're going to vote for based on what they say they're going to do. And in the UK, the two major parties, the Conservatives and Labour, both advocate the principle of a new high-speed rail line. So, in a way, the people chose this. The elected UK government formally decided to build HS2 back in 2012. After a lot of debate and consultation, finally in 2017, Parliament overwhelmingly passed a bill giving the government special powers to build, operate and maintain Phase 1. When Boris Johnson then became Prime Minister in 2019, he commissioned the Oakervie Review to advise his government on whether and how to proceed with the project. Then he made the final call.
The Cabinet has given high-speed rail the green signal. We are going to get this done.
At that point, with powers already obtained from Parliament back in 2017, Boris signed the final notice to proceed with the project. Permission for Phase 2A followed in 2021. To try and get a better understanding of this complicated process and how it's used to approve projects like HS2, I went to see Stephen Glaister. He's Emeritus Professor of Transport and Infrastructure at Imperial College London, and he was a contributor to that Oakervie Review.
The parliamentary process, of course, is very important with a big scheme like this. You can't build a railway in this country without parliamentary approval. The government has made a decision in principle to build this scheme. So it's a matter of policy to build the whole scheme. The parliamentary process is to allow people who are badly affected to make their case about how their interests should be dealt with.
In 2012, when the project was first backed, it was given a target finish date of 2026 for Phase 1 and 2033 for Phase 2. The initial budget was set at £32.7 billion. That's a lot of cash. It gets funded by something called a grant in aid from the government, which in turn gets its money from the taxpaying public, people like me and you. Small amounts gathered from millions of us can create a hefty budget, and that's what puts most national infrastructure projects in a completely different budget galaxy to skyscrapers or other buildings funded by private companies or people. Even tech giants like Google, Facebook or Apple don't spend more than a few single-digit billions on their flagship projects, and they're some of the richest firms in the world. Now, you'd think that combining such a big budget with the UK's history as the birthplace of the railways would be a winning formula, but HS2 hasn't gone to plan, and public opinion now is generally far from positive. Data from May 2022 shows that only 7% of Brits strongly support HS2, compared to 19% that strongly oppose it.
So what happened between the original business case when people were sold HS2 and all those benefits made it feel like a bit of a no-brainer, and today? Well, the short answer is that the ambitious dream of redefining how people travel has begun to clash hard with the realities of making it happen.
Many are unhappy with the choice of route. Residents and businesses have had to be moved out of the way. Thousands of people have been served with compulsory purchase notices, and others have seen their properties plummet in value.
These initial works mark the start of years of heavy construction and a crash in the value of property nearby.
Sadly, this is often the trade-off when building infrastructure. To benefit millions, a minority are asked to pay a heavy price.
Building a project like this, on a route like this, inevitably means you're going to have to make some tough decisions at some points on the way around what has to move out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we're doing here just at Euston alone, you know, right on top of the local community, a live railway station just behind us, massive demolitions in the background here just to sort of clear the footprint for the station. So to your point, those tough decisions are made. You could point to multiple examples of them all along the route.
However, some property owners feel they've been offered unfair valuations and have criticised how they were dealt with. But perhaps the biggest source of contention has been the project's environmental impact. Even with sections like the Long Itchington Tunnel, which aim to protect ancient woodland as much as possible, around 24 hectares will be lost on Phase 1 across 25 sites. That's around 34 football pitches. HS2 say this only amounts to the partial destruction of these habitats, and they're planting millions of new trees in return that they are responsible for maintaining.
When you put point-to-point city high-speed connections in place, that has the economic effect. But to do that, we've had to be really sensitive about the impact on the natural environment. We've got a target to plant some 7 million bushes and trees along the route. We're getting close to north of 700,000 already. We're very sensitive to and it's sympathetic to that natural environment.
Now, you could argue that people and businesses might, in time, adapt and move on from a difficult compulsory purchase of their land. But trees that have been around since the time of Elizabeth I aren't coming back anytime soon, and that's tough for some to swallow. The anger has boiled over into numerous protests, from sites way out in the country to the heart of the capital.
In a park in front of Euston Station, some people who want HS2 stopped have set up a protest camp.
There are 80,000 people here and they all walk through the open countryside here, and HS2 is a concrete electrified scar that will cut them off from their access to countryside.
Many also believe the project poses a huge threat to animals and other plant life, even though efforts are being made to protect species like endangered bats, and the scheme is projected to leave behind 30% more wildlife habitats than exist currently. HS2 claims it's been employing more stringent environmental standards than in many other countries building high-speed tracks. And right there, you have one of the reasons why this project, which was already pricey to begin with, is now set to become the most expensive high-speed railway in the world. That 32 billion figure from earlier was only the initial budget from 2012. After just 1 year, the estimate had risen to 42.6 billion. It then went up to 55.7 billion in 2015, and that's the number that Parliament passed the bill on in 2017. 2 years later, HS2 put the cost at around 88 billion, while in 2020, the Oakerview Review found the bill could go as high as 106 billion. Today, the government puts the cost somewhere between 72 and 98 billion pounds. And with billions more in what's called future cost pressures now being reported, that number isn't final. The current global inflation and supply chain challenges could all start to have an impact too. 44.6 billion is now going on Phase 1 alone, more than the entire project was supposed to cost at first. And almost £15 billion of that has already been spent. We asked HS2 for comment on these budget issues, and they responded that the project remains within budget, meaning the latest budget that's been set. They added that the original budget was worked out using simple calculations and 2011 rates that didn't take the scheme's full complexities into account. Whatever your take on this, the cost now is a lot more than what was in the budget when Parliament chose to approve it. Would our elected MPs have made a different decision if they knew how much it would eventually cost?
Parliament was asked to make a decision in principle, but they were offered a set of costs which are much less than the outturn cost. Had they been offered at a cost of 100 billion, they might have come to a different answer on behalf of us all.
The project's been hit by delays too. Phase 1 was supposed to finish in 2026, but now it's 2029 at the earliest. As for the entire network, which was meant to wrap up by 2033, it could now be as late as 2041. 2B hasn't cleared Parliament yet, so exact details of what it will look like and where it will go remain uncertain. A bit of a case of to be or not to be.
Along the route, there have been some unexpected complications which have had pretty dramatic consequences. In 2019, ground conditions had become, in the words of HS2's then chairman, significantly more challenging than predicted.
He revealed that the 2015 cost estimate for Phase 1 was made without the benefit of any investigation of ground conditions or similar levels of detail across all areas of scope. More time's been needed for ground settlements, adding to the delays, and there have had to be route changes further north to avoid obstacles like salt mines. It's also been revealed that the cost of buying up property for Phase 1 is over 3 times more than first thought, at around £3.9 billion. That's according to figures provided to us by HS2. They added that every home, business and piece of land is unique, and there are sometimes different opinions between owners, their professional advisors and HS2 about the value of a property. In all cases, we seek a fair deal for both claimants and the taxpayer.
There have been delays to the stations too, including here at Euston. The latest designs were only revealed in March 2022, 7 years after the first images were made public, and after construction here had already begun.
And yet, there's more. One major decision has sparked anger and disappointment in the region that was supposed to benefit most from this project. London's one of the world's top financial centres, with a higher GDP across its metropolitan area than anywhere else in Europe, and a habit of spending big on infrastructure.
But many other parts of the UK, like here in Leeds, haven't seen the same levels of infrastructure and public services investment, creating a north-south divide that's only getting bigger. The north of England has long suffered with outdated transport systems, while the capital continues to get more big projects like the Elizabeth line. One of the current UK government's big pledges at the last election was to level up the whole country. Now, that involves boosting local economies outside London, and building a high-speed train line to them would be a good start.
To try and really understand the north-south divide and what a high-speed railway could do for this part of the country, I caught up with Henry Merrison from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. It's an independent body that represents businesses and civic leaders across the north.
How much of a north-south divide is there in the UK, and is it getting better or worse in your view?
So our analysis of the most recent ONS data, which is collected for all the regions of the UK, shows that London has really bounced back. And the challenge is that the rest of the country is still lagging behind. And in reality, under this current government, we're not making huge progress. It may take longer to see some of the benefits of some of the levelling up projects, but they're often too short term, not focused enough on long-term productivity, and so unlikely to yield the longer-term benefits we need economically.
But this is exactly the kind of issue that HS2 was designed to fix. So now the people of the north can look forward to Phase 2B being completed and all the economic advantages it's going to bring. Then there's Northern Powerhouse Rail, another major programme of upgrades which would link with HS2 as part of a new integrated rail plan for the region. Sounds like things are looking up at last.
But there's a big problem. When those costs were getting out of hand and it was decided that part of the route had to be shelved, it was the bit that runs right here to Leeds that took the hit.
That route we showed earlier, going all the way up to Leeds, is no longer happening, and that Northern Powerhouse Rail scheme has also been downgraded. The eastern leg of Phase 2B will now terminate near Nottingham, over 70 miles away. Trains will still be able to go further north, but only on existing non-high-speed lines. Although the intention is to get to Leeds eventually, and ideas have been put forward, nothing's been confirmed. There's just a study, which in itself is set to cost a further £100 million.
The original plan, which was to deliver HS2 in full and Northern Powerhouse Rail from here through Bradford across to Manchester, is now not being delivered. So losing both with no certainty exactly over what will replace it, there's a notional promise from government of some HS2 trains coming to Leeds. Well, we don't know how frequent or what the capacity will be, so we don't really know the value of that.
So we are talking to the government now about the eastern leg, certainly having travelled in around the Midlands and the north a lot on rail. You see the stark difference between the sort of frequency and regularity of services compared to London and South East. So that's, I think, where we need to sort of put our focus next, working with the Department for Transport.
But that's not all of it. The project is still being scaled back, and again it's the north that's affected. Even while we were making this film, another key section connecting to the West Coast Main Line was cut. It was through here that high-speed trains would have continued on as far as Scotland. The government says it's now committed to finding the best solution to take HS2 trains to Scotland, and will explore alternatives to deliver similar benefits. There's issues to iron out in Manchester as well, like the decision to build the main station on the surface rather than underground, which has been criticised by some local officials.
Currently, a journey from London to Leeds in the UK looks like this. Now, this trip is taking me 2 hours and 13 minutes. Under the original plans for HS2, that would have been dramatically cut to just 1 hour and 21 minutes. But when Phase 1 completes, the difference will be just 20 minutes. From what we were promised with HS2, that original dream, this fantastic railway connecting all parts of the UK, or certainly the north, has public opinion shifted now?
I think that the public opinion is wary of a government that isn't prepared to keep its promises to the north of England. In this country, we're entirely dependent on who the occupants of number 10 and 11 are for whether Leeds gets a mass transit system, or whether Leeds gets its HS2 station, or whether Leeds gets access to a train line that's supposedly for its own benefit.
Now, that doesn't mean the north isn't getting anything at all. Billions have been spent to upgrade transport links across this region through that new integrated rail plan. But for many people up here, that doesn't make up for the loss of high-speed rail, which they were promised by the government.
The integrated rail plan represented 36 billion of cuts to what had originally been promised, and that, rather than just being an economic problem, it's also a political problem for a government that claims it's levelling up.
If you had to describe HS2 in a single word, what would that word be?
A start. The problem is that I don't think this government intends to finish it.
To their credit, those currently working for HS2 are doing their best to move on from the past and politics and just focus on constructing the railway. But despite the good job that teams on the front line are doing, it's clear that what's currently being built is a long way from what was put forward at the beginning, and there's little sign of this project ever being stopped. So is it time for a radical rethink, or does this railway now simply have to be finished, no matter the cost?
HS2 might have gone from an ambitious dream to a bit of a nightmare, but the UK is far from the only country to have had a few difficulties when it comes to building new infrastructure.
In fact, many other public-funded railways have also fallen behind schedule and gone over budget. California High-Speed Rail in the US and Stuttgart 21 in Germany are just two examples. Big energy projects don't seem to fare much better either. The Olkiluoto 3 power plant in Finland and China's Three Gorges Dam Both faced big challenges. But it's not just the setbacks that feel repetitive. Infrastructure schemes like these all seem to fall back on the same vague, positive-sounding, and almost unquestionable counter-argument to their problems: the promise of long-term economic gain.
The almost counter trump card to all the delay, the controversy, is this card of economic gain, economic growth. And actually this is going to be, it's painful now, but it's going to be worth it in the long run, don't worry. Where's the line? How many more billions, how many more cost uplifts, how many more unexpected events before we say, actually, you know what, this just isn't worth it anymore, it's just too much hassle and we're never going to see the benefits? Or are we locked into this now, whatever it takes?
There's no mechanistic way of deciding whether or not something's worthwhile or not. At the end of the day, it is of course a decision for government on behalf of the nation. People do not understand what this is going to cost the taxpayer. If you take 100 billion and divide that by the population of the country, it turns out to be over £1,000 per head. Bearing in mind that HS2 will be of use, direct value, to rather a small proportion of the population. So there's a real issue there.
Another way of looking at that is £100 million a week, every week, for 20 years.
Are there days where you question whether or not the whole thing's worth it?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, you've got to believe in a project like this to do my job and all the people that work with me. You've got to believe it's an important project. So, of course, as you say, there are swings and roundabouts, and all big projects have sort of dark moments. But the highs more than outweigh the lows.
Do we have to just keep going and see it through? Or is there a line where we're just spending too much money and taking too much time for not enough economic gain?
Well, I think ultimately that's a big question for the politicians, but let's be really clear. One of the things we did in my first sort of 18 months is reset the budget for phase one. I inherited both the budget and the time frame, which proved to be undeliverable. But taxpayers generally can and should have confidence that we've set ourselves up now to deliver the project for the budgets we've committed to government.
When done properly, the payoff of big public projects can be huge. They have the ability to shape our world and change its course. Better connectivity between countries, cleaner, more affordable energy, lifting people out of poverty, limiting the impact of natural disasters. It's all made possible by infrastructure projects. That's why so many national governments look to schemes like this and approve them despite their financial, social and environmental costs. Infrastructure has the potential to make a big lasting impact and enable countless other aspects of our societies, all with the added benefit of creating something very tangible and quite literally concrete to show voters.
But the bigger the rewards, the bigger the risks and the costs. The stakes all round get much higher and everything becomes magnified. Yes, things go wrong in other parts of construction. We've seen unfinished skyscrapers, which usually happens when private developers run out of cash. But when it's public money that's on the line, that word unfinished becomes unthinkable.
I do think that there's a problem in the British system, and maybe in other countries too, whereby governments get committed to a controversial idea, and because it's controversial, they make firm promises. And then if it turns out on further investigation not to be such a good idea, they defend the idea rather than being able to review it.
I've said many times, this project divides opinion. It draws a huge amount of public money, it's disruptive, it takes a long time, and people struggle sometimes to justify the investment in it. But of course, those railways that invested in high-speed rail have never regretted it.
Britain's High Speed 2 is a potent reminder of the power of infrastructure. It shows us once again what the construction industry can do and the impact it can have on so much of our lives. The teams pulling off the extraordinary feats of engineering to create this railway are quite literally writing this country's next chapter into its land. For whatever the mistakes of this project's management or the discourse around its very existence, that's something that can't be taken away from these amazing people, and that'll inspire future generations of engineers. And yet, around the world, the impact of what teams like this do places them in a firestorm of debate. Infrastructure schemes almost always face an uphill battle to deliver on their pledges and restore faith with the people they'll serve. We might be the ones coughing up the cash, but we're not calling the shots. While governments can be voted out, once projects like this get going and the train has left the station, there can be no going back. HS2 epitomises the story of the infrastructure megaproject. Huge benefits are laid out for future generations that citizens of today must bear the cost of, just as our predecessors did for us. The promise of a bigger prize ahead is used to counter painful issues and becomes the lens we see them through. Fear of stopping drives people on. Supporters and detractors are selective with their facts. We're told that we'll one day forget it all and only experience the benefits, but that verdict is cruelly deferred by decades. Only time will reveal the true extent of HS2's success and whether the decision to carry on was really worth it. But like so many infrastructure projects around the world, it will undoubtedly leave its mark on this nation. It's not the first massive scheme in history to daunt people with its costs, challenges and ambition. And it won't be the last.
It will redefine the economic geography of our country. It will transform the way we think about low carbon travel in our country. And I think, frankly, certainly if you're based in the Midlands and you live in the Midlands and the North, you won't realise the true effect it'll have until it's open.
Like so many of the world's biggest infrastructure projects, Britain's High Speed 2 promises enormous benefits, requires huge amounts of money, is grappling with immense challenges, and contains enough nuance and trade-off to sharply divide opinion. But for whatever you may think of this and other big public projects like it, it's kind of time that more of us sat up and took notice of the extraordinary influence that the construction sector has on all of our lives, and the massive projects being built with our money and in our names.
If you live in San Francisco and you want to get to LA, you kind of only have two options. A 6-hour drive or a journey out of the city to the airport, followed by the journey through the airport to a plane, followed by a 90-minute flight, then a journey through LA airport and then a drive to wherever you're headed. It's not exactly easy. That's where the incredibly sensible plan for a high-speed rail line comes in. It would better connect cities, boost the economy, cut emissions, and help bring the world's only superpower into the high-speed club that's currently dominated by China. But more than 20 years after it was first put forward, work on the line's been nowhere near as fast and efficient as the trains it one day hopes to run. Plagued by difficulties and battling America's cultural preference for flying and driving, the massive building project hasn't delivered much at all, and some now think it may never be fully completed. This is a look inside California's long, tumultuous and somewhat unbelievable struggle to build America's first high-speed rail line. America doesn't really build high-speed railways. Its current fastest line between Washington DC and Boston runs trains at 150 miles an hour, but many would argue that's not high speed. Instead, the country is plane and car travel centric, home to some of the world's busiest and most congested roads and airports. That's what makes California's plan for a 220 mile per hour high-speed rail line stand out and feel almost revolutionary. The plan is to link the regions of Southern California, San Joaquin Valley and San Francisco Bay, providing a faster and cleaner way to travel between them, boosting the local economy and limiting the disruption to agricultural and protected lands along the route. Getting between these areas has always been a headache, and it's always meant either a flight or a long car journey. It's a problem that originally sparked Elon Musk's idea for Hyperloop, though that system's journey to becoming reality is a whole other video, and the first system is now likely to become operational in the 2030s outside of the US. The project's being led by the state-run California High-Speed Rail Authority, and though that was set up in 1996, it wasn't until 2008 that the plan for the high-speed network, Proposition 1A, was approved by voters. Then, almost $10 billion in bonds were issued for the planning and construction of the network, which is set to extend over 800 miles. Phase 1 involves building that line from San Francisco to LA via the Central Valley, which then carries on to Anaheim. Phase 2 will go from LA to San Diego, with another offshoot running from Merced to Sacramento. Construction's currently underway on the Midway section, a 119-mile corridor linking Madera to Bakersfield, with 35 different sites currently active. One recent piece of news is the completion of the San Joaquin River Viaduct superstructure. It's a bridge on the border of Fresno and Medina County that'll act as a new gateway into the Central Valley. But while there's been some progress, it doesn't exactly make up for the countless setbacks that continue to force delays and push up costs. Originally priced at $33 billion in 2008, with services due to start in 2020, the final figure's now estimated at over $100 billion, and it won't be ready until at least 2029. And that's just the first section in the middle. Like so many things in life, it all comes down to money. That $10 billion bond was never meant to cover the whole project. The rest was due to come from private investors and the federal government. But those dollars have been hard to come by, and many potential backers have been unconvinced that Americans would choose to stop flying between the two cities and take the train instead. Keeping hold of the cash has also been a battle. In 2019, the Trump administration withdrew almost $1 billion in federal funding due to the lack of progress being made. Now, with a new government in place and with Joe Biden being famously train-friendly, the California High-Speed Rail Authority is pushing to get this hefty chunk of funding back into its bank account. Land acquisition's also been a total nightmare. There are still hundreds of parcels of land needed to secure a 65-mile section in Kings County near Fresco. That's after construction has begun on the route, which isn't exactly ideal. Even once the Central Valley line is finished, that'll represent just a fraction of the full system. The crucial connections to LA and San Francisco are not even close to starting. Those segments are currently stuck in the dreaded environmental review stage, and there's no real indication of how long that process will take or whether it will even lead to full approval. And then, if the green light is eventually given, there's the small issue of raising all that extra cash to make it happen. It's led some to label the project a train to nowhere, a system that ends up only serving the Central Valley where work is actually being done. Even California Governor Gavin Newsom criticised plans for the overall project in 2019, saying it would cost too much and take too long, blaming a lack of oversight and transparency. He said, "Right now there isn't a path to get from Sacramento to San Diego, let alone from San Francisco to LA. I wish there were." The decision to appoint certain contractors has been called into question as well. According to the Los Angeles Times, one firm that promised $300 million in savings by altering designs for the Kings County section ended up costing the project $800 million in overruns, and those proposed changes have now been largely scrapped. Despite all this, and with progress being closer to the pace of a snail than a bullet train, it's hard to ignore the benefits this project would bring if it's eventually finished. It's not just about speed and efficiency. Getting people out of their cars will be crucial to the US achieving the climate change targets set out by the Biden administration. With the passing of a $2 trillion infrastructure plan that has around $20 billion earmarked for intercity rail, there's now cautious optimism about the future of high-speed projects across the US. Although California's was the first to get going, it's not the only high-speed route that's planned, and it might not even be the first to finish. A high-speed line between Dallas and Houston could be up and running by 2026. There's also Brightline West, a fast connection between Victorville and Las Vegas, which is due to break ground in 2021 and would eventually join up with the Californian network. And private investors are also eyeing up potential projects in Florida and Maryland. Whichever comes first, and even if there are no further delays, America's first high-speed rail line is still years away, a stark contrast to what's happening in competing nations like China, albeit in a very different culture and political system. 2/3 of the world's combined high-speed rail network can now be found here, and the Europeans aren't too bad at building it either, outside of the UK. While the US may have little hope of catching the others in this particular race, the completion of California's high-speed line, in whatever form it takes, would at least set the wheels in motion. If you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.